welcome to Delightful! What's this? Our dragon group is still here? Well, if you stuck around for the little movie at the end of Phoenix's video, you may have seen a hint. That's right, it's time to make the secret 7th dragon! This wasn't just any secret project either. I am thrilled to tell you that this doll was done in collaboration with an accomplished character designer and illustrator, one of the incredibly talented artists who worked on the Spyro Reignited trilogy game, and a dragon-loving kid at heart like myself, the man, Nicholas Kole! You may recall this whole series was inspired by the Spyro remake, and he's the guy who drew that poster on my wall. How do I describe my feelings about our collaboration? Oh my gosh, yes! So here's what we did. After becoming acquainted through Instagram, we came up with a collaboration idea that would be fun for both of us. He would design a brand new dragon in the style of the Spyro games, and I would interpret his concept art into a doll form. Here's the incredible light dragon design he developed. Now, we've been planning this project since March, and Nicholas expressed interest in making a light-themed opposite character to complement our dark dragon Neeks. This really works out because I've seen you guys asking for a light dragon in the comments. Let's get rolling on this doll! For the base, I wanted to use a Reboot Monster High doll body, which have slightly thicker and sturdier feeling limbs compared to the original dolls. And for her head, I thought Abby Abominable's face and jaw shape have the appropriate lioness feeling I want. Funny enough, this Briar and Cleo combo doll happened during Mai Tai's creation, if you remember. So to get the body back, I'll need to decapitate Briar for a second time. After cutting off and extracting the hair, and erasing the face with acetone, Abby's head has been prepped for customization. I want to shrink the head down a few sizes, so I plop it into a jar of acetone for 2 hours, extract the pickled head, and let it dry out. The acetone deteriorates plasticizer in the vinyl as it soaks, and as it evaporates, the head shrinks to a smaller size and becomes harder. This is why it's preferable to pop the head back on over the neck peg before it hardens into a rock. Now to prepare the body. Into the dust box it goes. Off come her human legs, and I chop the fingers down too. I thought I'd sculpt new hands to match the drawing's posture. So using a handheld drill, I form new holes in the palms and plant an armature wire into each one of them. Clay will get added to her body later, so I'm not too worried about the mummy wrap texture molded on the skin, although I do sand it down around the arms. I sketched up a blueprint for her new legs and paws, which I can place inside a plastic sleeve to make it easy to sculpt on top of. The knees get a larger bolt and nut, and the ankles get a smaller bolt and nut. This determines the size of the hole you'll need to drill into the popsicle sticks. Speaking of the sticks, I'll be gluing 2 together to double the thickness for all the joints. I'm hoping this will make the legs sturdier and therefore longer lasting. Once they dry, I drill the holes into the wood. I dared to stack them all together and drill multiple holes at once, and it actually worked out and saved me some time. I carved the wood sticks down to match the silhouette of my drawings, keeping in mind that this first piece needs to connect to the doll. That ought to do it. As always, glue is great for stabilizing, but you want the heavy lifting to be done with actual armature to guarantee your doll will last long and stay strong. After a fair amount of whittling and carving down sticks, the wooden armature is ready. Each leg gets 6 sticks, which link together like so to make the hinge joints. I glue the leg segments together while the bolts are in place so that nothing shifts around. Now, what about those articulated toes, you ask? Well, seeing as this is going to be a gift for Nicholas Kole, I'm hyper aware that the quality of this doll better be good, like the best I can possibly do. So you bet we're going to be abusing the power of our 3D printer for this one. I sent this schematic to my husband, who used the program ZBrush to whip up these chunky lioness toes in no time. We printed each piece out on our Creality 3D Ender 3 filament printer. I had to make a couple other accessories too, but we'll get to those later. The 4 toes stack together like so and stay connected to the base with a wooden dowel. I carved them down to fit inside my blueprint drawing because they came out too big, oops, then fastened them to the wooden pieces with more wires and a touch of glue. That's looking great! Secure the ends of the bolts and nuts with Apoxy Sculpt. Hide the exterior nut side of the leg with a solid blob, and encompass the inner bolt head sides by coiling epoxy snakes around them. This way we will still have access and can tighten or loosen the bolts on the finished doll, but they stay out of sight. Her fingers also get a first pass of epoxy, which solidifies their new pose. With all the necessary structures in place, we can begin sculpting. I dive in with large chunks of air-dry clay and cover up all the wires and unsightly structures. And push a layer of clay over the original mummy bandage molding to conceal that. I also build up the fingers, but in retrospect, this first pass over the fingers probably should have been an epoxy. This air-dry stuff feels a little weak. Once dry, subsequent passes are made over each piece, carving off chunks that stick out too far and then adding back on the refined detail. I was chugging along and just getting into the thick of it when I set the doll down and took a step back. I liked what I'd made, but compared to the concept art, well, I'm not sure where I went wrong, but her feet are just too big. In fact, the whole doll was looking too big. I took a good hard look at my work-in-progress body and decided it wasn't right. I had to start over. This reboot Claudine will be the new body, and thankfully I have another Abby head available, although it's a yucky glue-tastrophe. Ick. Don't worry, I'll spare you having to watch the same process twice. Essentially, I tried again with smaller feet and one less custom joint at the knee in an attempt to better match the concept art. I did keep the hands I already made though. Well, for now. So here we are again. The ankle joint has been shifted much lower to provide the doll with a more upright posture, and you can see I took one toe out of the foot and shrank the size down significantly. Let's pick up where we left off. On to the cosmetic sculpting. She's got a scaly belly from the neck down, so I smush snakes of Epoxy Sculpt onto the doll and flatten them out into plates. I also drill and embed a magnet into her chest, which becomes useful later on. Sand down the modifications for a silky smooth finish, then add the final touches. I sand it down before doing these last details because it would be a lot harder to sand around those tiny spikes, you know? The sculpting phase is done, so we can move on to painting. I coat the entire doll with a layer of gesso first to prime the surface. Should I have waited to connect the toes before I painted the doll? Yes, but it's too late now. After a layer of gesso has completely dried, it can be sanded down for an extra smooth finish. I take the time to smooth out all noticeable brush strokes, particularly on her face. This is a good method to use if you want a smooth finish but don't own an airbrush. Areas around joints will always be more prone to chipping, so I preemptively sand down the gesso near these areas and just expect the plastic color to be visible on the final doll. Luckily, Claudine's brown skin tone should mesh pretty well with the warm oranges of our light dragon. Now, this may seem a little weird, but I'm going to separate her head here in preparation for the horns. I wasn't quite sure how I'd have fixed the horns at this point in time, but we'll come back to this in a bit. Starting with light colors first, I mix up acrylic paint and cover her belly scales, inner legs, and the palms of her hands with a light yellow. Then I come back in with yellow ochre to begin the transition to darker oranges on the sides and back of her body. Looking at Nicholas's artwork, I decided to interpret the colors on her face like so. Lighter yellow below the cheeks and orange-brown at the forehead and nose. I do try to make smooth transitions between the two colors, but making gradients with acrylic paint is hard, man. It dries so fast. I paint on darker and darker oranges, adjusting and fixing the values as I go, constantly checking the concept art to make sure I'm on track. I paint on darker shadows under each belly scale, then paint a couple of highlights to visually sharpen the edges of all the spikes. I also paint on her claws and give her little toe beans. I'm satisfied with the paint job, so I mix my varnish with 2/3 water and coat the doll several times to protect the surface. No matter how matte my varnish claims to be though, it always turns out glossy. So to solve this issue, I spray the entire body with Mr. Super Clear Sealant. I sprayed the face in particular twice in preparation for the face-up. Most of the work has already been done with the acrylic paint, so I dive right in with a dark brown pencil and sketch out her eye lines. Wanting to match the expression in the concept art, I drew them slightly closed and turned up the bottom lids to give her eyes a smile. I add her cute eyebrow blobs and color in her eyes. These colors are lighter, so they'll take a couple more layers between the MSC to build up opacity. Because there's already a lot of contrast on the face, I thought keeping her lips fairly neutral would look good. During this series, a lot of people asked for male dragons or wondered why most of the group was depicted female, and I've said it before, the simple truth is that female characters are more fun to design and create, or at least they are for me. Also, I felt that in general, dragons are seen as masculine creatures, so I hoped that my series could help balance the scales in some small way. Nicholas also expressed an interest in creating female dragon characters, especially coming off the Spyro games, whose world only has male dragons. Where are all the ladies? Where did all the eggs come from? Maybe that's a question for game theory. After building up the colors with pencil, I switched to acrylic paint to finish the job. This includes whitening the eyes, pupil color, and of course the tooth. A couple finishing touches here and there, and I'm happy with the face. I spray it one final time with MSC, then cover the lips and eyes with high gloss varnish. With the body complete, let's set the doll aside for a while and craft all of her accessories. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm pulling out all the stops to make the best possible doll I can for Nicholas, which means there's a lot to make. I sorted all the components into sections to make the process easier to follow, but this is more for me than for you. Anyway, let's begin with the cloth section. Her wings are debatably the most eye-catching part of her design, so I knew they had to be well crafted. I began by sketching out the shape onto paper, making them the right size to match a Monster High doll. I darken the lines and roughly color in sections of the wings, which indicate what fabric I need for those spots. I also went ahead and drew the tail parts too, so we can cut all the fabric out at the same time. I ordered several yards of cotton fabric in a spectrum of colors, which I'm hoping to patch together into a beautiful stained glass-like pattern on the wings. Taking a look at the artwork again, you can see her mothy wings have slight color variation between the panels, but there's also a lighting effect happening. I suspect Nicholas threw this cool purple shadow color in there to bring the palette together, and likely intended it to just be a neat concept arty shading technique. But I want the colors to harmonize on the physical doll as well, so I decided to interpret these shadow colors into real life as different fabric colors. I start by cutting all the pieces out in one main fabric color. Then, using my custom orange dye that I mixed up for Aquarian, I stained the bottom edge of the wings and tail pieces for a subtle gradient. I worried that, should I only sew patches of fabric together, the wings might end up looking like a quilt, so I'm hoping this gradient will smooth the transition and look more organic, I guess. I hang them out to dry, then give them a quick rinse to set the dye. Once the pieces are dry again, I apply glue all around the raw edges of each piece to stop it from fraying. I waited to do this until after I dyed them because the glue interferes with the dye. But at least now I can relax and not worry about the fabric coming undone. Clean up the edges once the glue is dry. That looks nice and sharp. Taking the pattern piece and slipping it underneath the fabric, I trace all the veins and segments onto the wing with pencil. I then proceed to trace the segments onto the other fabric colors I need, referencing the color coding on the paper pattern to make sure I trace the correct chunk of shapes. Each of these freshly cut pieces also gets glue around the edges, and eventually we have this. Now if we just sew the shapes on as is, we would double the thickness of the fabric, meaning we would lose that stained glass sun catcher effect when illuminated from behind. This effect is essential to the character, so we need to keep the whole wing one layer of fabric thick. To do this, I trace each shape again for maximum accuracy, then cut around that line, leaving the tiniest amount of overlap. After everything is cut out, we end up with these puzzle pieces, which we'll need to sew back together. I intended to give the tail and head crown pieces the same treatment, but the details were so small that I had to sacrifice the sun catcher gimmick for the sake of accuracy. So these pieces are 2 layers thick. Alas. Here we are! The pieces are reunited and a single layer thick. However, I know that over time, edges of fabric that aren't stitched down will eventually curl, so to make these wings strong and long-lasting, I super secure all the edges with a whip stitch. Two days of hand stitching later, and we have this. Now everything needs an armature wire to become posable. I recently acquired a new wire, and although it's more malleable than my usual industrial stuff, it appears to be just as tough when it comes to the break test. I hope it holds up just as well, because it looks a lot prettier and more delicate than what I usually use. Each wing and the tail get a wire armature. And for the base of the wings, which will attach to our doll's back, each wing gets a whittled down popsicle stick with a hole drilled in it. I attach each wire to the top of the wooden panels with epoxy glue, then use my normal glue to cover up and strap in the wire for extra security. Then glue these pieces directly to the wings, and get out that thread and needle again to whip stitch the wire down to the upper edge. I secure the wire and threads with a dab of glue for some extra security before moving on to the painting stage. I use a tiny angle brush to trace over and thicken all the pencil lines using acrylics. Even though I kept my stitches as neat and flat as possible, concealing those rough edges gives them a clean and finished look. Naturally, the lines need to be painted on both sides, so use a light table or window to trace the lines onto the opposite side. If you work late into the night as I often do, you may have to turn on the light and go outside in order to get the backlighting you need. And to play up that purple shadow color, I touch up the line work with purple at the tips and a desaturated brown near the base to mimic illumination. The design is so intricate and I wanted to make them very high quality, so in the end the wings took about 5 days to make. And they turned out very nice, if I do say so myself. The 2 tail pieces get stitched together and turned into a tube shape with both ends open. With the fin stitched to the end of the wire like so, it gets inserted into the tube. I then hand stitch the loose tips down to the fin, and stuff the rest like filling in a plush doll. A couple finishing touches with acrylic paint should bring it up to a level that matches the wings. I wasn't sure how to handle the back of the pieces that were too small to cut out and do the single layer thing. So after a lot of internal debating, I figured painting the opposite side would probably look best. Her clothing was handled in a similar way, although the pattern making part of the process took a bit more futzing. I used blue knit fabric to keep the hemming and fraying to a minimum, and simply painted on the gold design before sewing everything together. To make the fabric sit correctly across her chest, I stitched a magnet into the knit, which connects to the one implanted in her sternum. Clothing falls differently on a miniature scale, so sometimes you have to use tricks to make the fabric look heavier and weighty. One last hurdle to jump before we assemble this doll together: her horns. There's a reason I put them off until last. It took ages to figure out the circuit. That's right, these babies are gonna light up! I mean, she's a sunny light dragon, it'd be a crime if they didn't. With this circuit, I learned that different colored LEDs have different voltages, which complicates things. And I'd be lying if I told you I completely understood what's going on here, but with a little help, we finally got our breadboard circuit to work. So I took that and soldered it together into its final form, making it as small and clean as I could. We 3D printed the perfect battery casing and attached copper plates to connect the circuit, although I'm sorry to say that I did not include a switch. We have switches, but I didn't trust myself to solder it well enough to be useful. It would probably end up breaking, so the only way to turn it on and off is to remove a battery. Not ideal, but I think it's the best I can do. Next up, I sculpted and carved 4 horns out of epoxy. I buffed and polished these pieces best I could in preparation for our next step, silicone mold casting. I then hang all the horns facing down into a paper cup, securing them with sticky tack. Using an accurate gram scale, I mix the appropriate ratio of silicone to hardener. For this brand, it's 10:1, then mix thoroughly. In an attempt to eliminate bubbles from forming in the mold, I release the mixed silicone from above and let it fall into the cup below. This is called the bombs away method, and it's basically your best option if you don't own a vacuum chamber. The next day, the silicone mold has cured and the fixtures can be removed. Cleaving the mold in half to get at the horns was a little tricky, but I was happy to get all 4 horns into one cup, so it was worth the trouble. I make one big slice down each horn and extract it. I sculpted the horns with a front and back orientation, which is impossible to see from the mold, so I label each mold with the horn's number and which way is front. Now for the scariest part, embedding the LEDs into the resin. I took it 1 horn at a time for accuracy's sake and double-checked both the LED and resin's colors with my blueprint. The molds I made aren't great, to be honest, so I called the hubby over to help hold it open while I poured in the resin and tried to jam it all the way down into the tip. I'm sure silicone mold and resin experts are cringing hard right now. I placed the horn into our custom-made UV lamp, then delicately dip the first LED into the resin and balance it on top. Trying not to breathe, I turn on the lamp and wait about 10 minutes. Whew, feels like playing the game Operation. Our lamp is pretty good at curing some types of resin, but the stuff I'm using needs direct sunlight to finish the job. Our apartment only gets direct sunlight in the morning though, so I guess I better go find some. Then it can be extracted from the mold. Ta-da! I'm pretty happy with that. Now just gotta do it 6 more times. My husband's a real trooper. I'm proud to report that all the horns came out well. And I used the excess resin to make some cool orbs. Hooray! They did need a little cleaning up and sanding because my mold wasn't perfect, but I'm just happy there's not a huge bubble inside any of them, you know? My biggest concern now is, can this massive wire fit into the doll's head? I made the circuit as small as I could, but there's still not much space in there. I cut the neck peg shorter than ever before, but I think it's fine because the shrunken head fits a lot tighter to the neck, and I need all the room I can get. I then scrunch up my circuit and bind it together using thread. Then I set it into the skull and mark where I want each horn to emerge. Taking a needle and thread, I make a ton of laces that I use to tie each horn in place. I know this looks real messy and maybe excessive, but securing the horns in the right place is all I care about. Doing it slowly like this gave me a lot more control than, say, trying to glue them all at once. I can still fine-tune them a bit before stiffening the base with hot glue, one at a time, of course. And there it is! Whew! The hardest part is now fully behind us. To finish up the head, I sculpt the crown-shaped bases around her horns and fill in the back of her skull with epoxy. Oh yeah, and I add magnets to the temples. These will hold on her head crescent. Once cured, I paint it to match, and I cut out a bevel in her forehead before gluing on her final horn. Betcha forgot she had one more in the middle. The dragon has no hair, of course, but I thought her doll form should have majestic golden brown locks swept back behind her crown. This color is Asuna from the Doll Planet, a perfect match. I finish her head frill by sewing on 2 more magnets that align with the hidden ones in her temple, so it easily pops on and off like this. Pretty slick, right? I wanted this to be removable in case her hair needs repositioning or anything. We've done it! We made all the parts! Now she just needs assembly. I drill a hole into her booty to insert the base of the tail and secure it with more epoxy glue. Then the wings layer up and screw into a hole in the back like so. Pop on the bracelets and the rest of her clothes, and bam! She's complete! With the doll fully assembled at last, I set her down and turned in for the night. The next morning, I returned to my work table with a fresh set of eyes and decided I was not satisfied. I can't see her hair from the front, and those hands really do look too big. I can do better. So with one more day's work of corrective changes, she finally reached a level I was proud of. Totally worth the effort. May I proudly present Khepri. Knowing this was my only chance, I did go a bit overboard on the photo shoot this time, so it's longer than usual. But I'm very happy with a lot of these shots, so please enjoy. Khepri is the name of an ancient Egyptian god who is associated with the movement of the sun, and can also be translated as to create or morning sun. Quick thank you to Jackie from Nerdy Crafter, who helped me out with the Egyptian name and gave me a quick vocal lesson for the Arabic pronunciation. Hopefully I didn't screw it up too bad. Khepri looks great among the group, and I'm definitely going to miss her from the dragon lineup. Her golden yellow color palette completes the group and makes a great contrast to our dark dragon Neeks. It's going to be hard to part with her. I really hope he likes her too! We're both dragon enthusiasts who grew up playing Spyro, so this collaboration was such a treat. I really can't overstate how enthused I was to develop his concept art into a doll. One thing I did not see coming was how bright the green LED bulb would be. For some reason it outshines the others, particularly when the batteries start to give out. It is the first horn in the circuit, so I'm not sure if that's got anything to do with it. In retrospect, I wish I'd done all white LEDs and just colored the resin. A huge thank you to Nicholas and Erica. Thank you so much for watching and for doing this collaboration with me. I will be sending Khepri to these two in exchange for some signed prints, making this a classic art trade. I think we'll include some fun snacks and whatnot too, so look forward to an unboxing later. You can find all of Nicholas's social links below in the description box if you'd like to check out more of his amazing work. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this very special Secret 7th Dragon. Like and subscribe so that you never miss a custom doll, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay artsy! Annyeong! Come on home. Kitty.